Hello, friends. This is Tony again from Refinement, Not Retirement. We are continuing our series on the Trump trial, covering it from a UK perspective, something that I don't think is being done anywhere else. And just wanted to say that, first of all, let's just see where we are in the status of the trial. Michael Cohen, it's Monday, what date are we? Crikey, the 20th of May. And today, as I understand it, Michael Cohen's cross-examination will be continuing and is likely to be a few more hours, as I understand it, from the estimate given by his lawyer. It seemed that there was some sort of inconsistency exposed in the cross-examination when it ended last week. It appeared to me anyway that intense questioning exposed that maybe a conversation that Michael Cohen referred to was what the evidence that he gave earlier was not entirely accurate, although he made it sort of very clear that he had done so on the basis of a recollection being refreshed from the documents, and this was a long time ago, so it's hardly surprising that they were able, as happens in cross-examinations, that they were able to smoke out what I think was a mistake. But I think that the overwhelming evidence against Trump is there, mainly in the form of actual documents. So, a skilled lawyer, of course, can always smoke out an inconsistency, a mistake, and I don't think that is surprising, and I don't think it's the momentous inconsistency or a lie as it's being portrayed by the defense. I don't think it rises to the level of a case-changing event. But he will go. Maybe they'll do some greater damage today. Let's see. But it looks to me as though Cohen has performed pretty well, very well actually. But most importantly, he has laid out the story very clearly, and everything that he's laid out is supported by actual documents. So what's going to happen after that? As I understand it, we are yet to find out whether the defense are going to put on an actual case. They don't have to. They don't have to prove anything. It's up to the prosecution to prove the charges beyond all reasonable doubt, which of course is a very high standard of proof. Whether is Trump going to give evidence? Well, that follows on. If they're going to put on a case, they then have to make a decision about what the content of that case is in terms of witness evidence, in terms of witnesses, and the general feeling is that there is no way on earth that Trump will testify. And he has said in the past that he wants to testify, but is prevented from doing so by the judge's gagging order, which is totally nonsense. And I think the judge has made that abundantly clear. But I'm quite sure that the judge will, if Trump, as is expected, declines to give evidence, I'm sure that there will be a conversation between the judge and Trump directly, making sure that the judge makes very, very clear to Trump, and that Trump understands that it is his right to give evidence, and there's nothing preventing him from doing so in terms of court order or anything of that nature, as he has falsely claimed. So there has been quite a enormous development in this whole scenario, this whole story, not directly related to this trial, but I did make reference in part 4, our last episode, to something that came up in the Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court's, I should say, hearing when they heard oral arguments in relation to Trump's claim that the president has absolute immunity. And I said I was rather, I think I might have used the expression gobsmacked. I was rather gobsmacked when I heard one of the justices put a position which struck me as being really weird. Now, that particular justice, well, what he was, as I understand what he was saying, was that it would be, he was sort of implying the president needs immunity, or he was implying that he was open to the argument that a president needs immunity from criminal prosecution, because if he didn't have that, he would fear leaving office, because he might face, instead of going into a peaceful retirement, he might face criminal charges from a bitter political opponent, and that would motivate him to cling on to power. I think that's the way his mind was thinking, which just struck me as a really odd thing to postulate. Well, it turns out that Supreme Court Justice, Samuel Alito, it's come to light that he, at his house, I should say, a flag, an American flag, was flown upside down. It has made the UK media, so you may have read about this. At his house, the American flag was flown upside down, which is a symbol, is universally considered to be a symbol of protest. And specifically, since the January 6th insurrection, it's supposed to be signifying a support for Trump's Stop the Steal position, whereby he claims falsely that the election was stolen from him by, various corrupt means, and he still claims that he was the true winner of the 2020 election, even though that has been, even though he has litigated that something like 60 plus times in various courts and lost on every single occasion. Every judge that's looked at it has dismissed that idea. Even judges appointed by Trump, right-wing judges, there's just no substance in that argument at all. And yet Trump continues to claim that. Well, the Justice Alito, is saying that this was all his wife. He knew nothing about it. That's as I understand his position. This was a few days after the actual January the 6th event that this was supposed to have taken place at Alito's house. But the other, although he may claim that it was nothing to do with him, he claims that his wife had some kind of dispute with a neighbor over the neighbor's animosity towards Trump, as I understand it, and using an expletive on a sign or something. So although he claims, the justice claims that he knew nothing about it, he's a Trump-appointed justice, of course. He also voted to take an appeal from an insurrectionist, as I understand it. He was voted down by the other justices, but he did dissent from that voting down, which is, if you put these things together, it's all these things, what he said in the oral arguments, the upside down flying of the flag, and what I've just referred to in that appeal by an insurrectionist that he wanted to hear, it does seem very clear that that he's a MAGA guy. He's a supporter, and it looks pretty clear that he believes that the 2020 election was stolen from Trump. It looks like that. Might be wrong, but the look is not a good one. And as I understand the legal position, as I understand the position on recusal, a judge in the US should recuse themselves if there is a reasonable appearance of bias. And I think he should recuse himself, and a lot of legal commentators are saying that in the US. But the whole thing really smells bad, doesn't it? And I was talking to a friend in the US yesterday, and she had listened to the last episode where I had made comments about Justice Alito, and she said, "Why are you so sure?" Well, I said a number of things, not just about Alito, but about the whole trial and so on. And I think I indicated particularly that, Trump appeals everything, and even if he loses this criminal trial, even if he if he loses this criminal trial, is found guilty, he'll appeal it, and it'll end up in the Supreme Court. So, he appeals everything, and so it's highly likely that many of his appeals will end up being heard by Justice Alito and other there's another very right-wing judge, Clarence Thomas, I think his name is. So, I think it's very, very worrying that. So she was saying, well, why are you so sure? Why did you say that you were so sure that this couldn't happen in the UK? And that's a very fair question. I'm not really I haven't really thought that through as to why I think that, but I have a sense that there is no way on earth that any judge, certainly not a judge at this level, the highest level in the UK, would allow themselves to be influenced by politics. Well, I mean, I suppose everyone to a certain extent is influenced by their politics, but I just can't imagine that they would that there would ever come a situation where a justice in the UK behaved like that. I think that's a product of the tradition of our judicial independence, but the appointment process, I think, is very, very different. I mean, the president appoints. I know it has to be approved, but confirmed by the Senate, but in the US, but the president appoints the Supreme Court justices, as I understand it. And we saw that sort of how political that got with that unedifying spectacle when Justice Kavanaugh was appointed. And it really became a political dogfight, with the Democratic side trying to block that appointment. So that sort of cuts the other way, but it seems to me that judges should be appointed for their legal merit, and not on the basis of a political dogfight. And I'm not sure whether my friend, I didn't really ask her whether she was because I can't even remember whether my comment about never being able to happen in the UK was specifically about this issue of the justice, or whether it went wider than that. I can't recall, with regard to, could a leader like Trump ever emerge? But if she did mean that, no, I don't think he could. I don't think a Trump would emerge, but I'm not sure. I mean, it seems to me that the US is really in danger of descending into fascism. if Trump wins, I mean, I think there are all kinds of horrible consequences because he'll come back emboldened and also with experience of what he can get away with if he gets the right people around him. And he seems to be preparing for getting the right people around him so that there aren't people there that can talk him out of the things that he wants to do. I think it has big consequences, obviously, for the US, but also for the world, because Trump has made it very clear that he's against supporting Ukraine. He is a big admirer, clearly, of Putin. We've had populists in populist leaders in the UK. The one that sort of springs to mind is Nigel Farage, who it seemed for a long while was a big supporter, may still be for all I know, and friend of Trump. But he's been very quiet on that front for a long time, and I don't think that he will be looking across the pond and thinking, this is somebody that I want to continue to show overt support for. I would like to hear from him now that we have all these legal matters which are descending on Trump. And Trump makes the argument. Well, let's just, I'm sort of all over the place at the moment, but so maybe I should just stick first of all to on my theme about whether we could have something like this. Farage didn't, Farage was really a single issue politician. He wanted Brexit to happen, and I think it was largely due to him that it did happen. But he's got nowhere in terms of being a serious political player in the overall politics in the UK. And I think we have a lot of safeguards in place to prevent someone like that becoming an overall leader, prime minister. So, or even anything close to that, which I just can't see that happening. So the other thing is, we had this spectacle of last week of these, let's call them Trump mini-me's, these guys. I don't even know their names. I can't even remember their names, but the people who all dressed up in their, like Trump, with red ties and similar suits, and paraded into court in a sort of protest. That would just not happen in the UK. They all just in their speeches outside the court, they all just parroted the things that Trump says over and over again, that this is not a genuine legal criminal case against him. It's all a sham. It's a witch hunt. Election interference, blah, blah, blah. They all just parroted that. But the funny thing is that Trump's defense is it's solely political. I mean, never does he or any of his mini-me cronies, nothing that they said addressed the substance of the case against Trump. He doesn't deal with the evidence. He doesn't deal with the facts. He just dismisses it all as a big political witch hunt, when there is overwhelming evidence, it seems to me, of his guilt and of his lies. So, it as I say, I mean, I cannot imagine UK politicians behaving. I can't even think of one that would behave in such a bizarre and troubling way as these mini-me's have, and indeed as Trump does. I mean, the things that Trump has been found either well, not, he hasn't been found guilty of any criminal matter yet, but the civil matters like the fraud, the financial fraud, the defamation of the woman who he was found by a jury, at least one jury, to have the woman that he had sexually assaulted. I mean, how can someone like that, how can you vote for somebody like that? Well, it seems that the Trump MAGA supporters just want to believe everything that he says, regardless of the clear evidence and judicial decisions which show the opposite position to be true. And I find that very troubling, really. I mean, but particularly, you can understand people who perhaps have not been sufficiently educated that they might be easily influenced, but you can't dismiss the whole movement on that basis at all. These aren't stupid people. I mean, Justice Alito is clearly a very clever man. Don't become a Supreme Court justice by being a dummy. So what is it? What is it that leads people to behave in a way that to me is just beyond fathomable? I mean, it's I really, really don't get it. And when you look back at history at leaders like Hitler and Mussolini, I mean, I hesitate to sort of draw comparisons, but I think I think it's valid because when you have intelligent people just going along with effectively a cult, regardless of facts, regardless of what judges have decided on the basis of actual evidence in courts of law, where you can't bullshit like Trump continually does and get away with it, but you can in the wider political context, and this sort of cultish behavior, which seems to be moving the dial in the direction of fascism and away from democracy. That really is frightening for the US and frightening for the world. I've never seen division in my lifetime like this in the US before. And you really wonder whether, when you think about events like the January 6th attack on the Capitol and how the accounts we've had of how terrified politicians felt who were inside that building. When you think about that, you can see why some people have talked about the possibility of a civil war. Again, I hesitate to use the term civil war, but I don't think it's too far-fetched, because the two sides are becoming more and more entrenched. And I think back obviously I can't think back to it because I wasn't obviously around, but I think about the history of the US Civil War, and again making a comparison with the UK situation, because we had differing opinions in the UK, in Britain, about the abolition of slavery. Slavery had gone on for hundreds of years, and a lot of people had made money, and it was very much part of the financial success of the country, I'm ashamed to say, but that's a fact. But we didn't have, I mean, we sorted out those divisions, it seemed to me, without getting anywhere near the sort of terrible conflict which took place in the US. And so is there something in the US makeup that that forms the basis of this, the potential for this sort of extreme division, polarization? I think there must be. And so, what are we witnessing here? Because if you project what's going to happen, I think it's, I think there's a strong likelihood that Trump is going to be convicted in this first criminal case. And this is probably the weakest of all the cases. And there are myriad cases, more and more being piled on. There's Jack Smith, the special prosecutor's case. Well, that's been deliberately, it seems to me, delayed by the Supreme Court. I mean, they've just thrown sand in the gears, haven't they? I mean, they played into Trump's wanting to delay that case, the case regarding the insurrection, the refusal to transfer peacefully power to Biden, or his attempts to stop that peaceful transfer of power. The Supreme Court has thrown sand in the gears by accepting an appeal on a pretty sort of daft basis of, a president should have absolute immunity from criminal prosecution, even if he uses the military to assassinate a political opponent. That's seriously what Trump's lawyer was arguing, with a straight face. And the court, the Supreme Court took that appeal, but knowing that it was going to almost certainly mean that there wouldn't be a decision in that case, a ruling, a decision by a jury as for or against Trump. And of course, if Trump wins, then the election, if he wins the election, my understanding is that he can stop federal cases against him in their tracks, and no doubt will do that. So if he's found guilty in this New York, the first criminal charge, he's going to appeal, isn't he? I mean, obviously. And it's going to head to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has now got a terrible reputation. So that's a pretty terrifying prospect, isn't it? Then there's the other case, the documents case in Florida, where there's a judge who's not anywhere near the heights of being a Supreme Court justice, although she may have designs on going that way. Just what's her name, Judge Aileen Cannon, who has been so supportive of Trump and anti the prosecution in relation to the documents case, where that's probably the strongest case from my perspective. Having looked at it, I think that's the strongest case of all, because it's really open and shut. He really has no defense, as I can see it, to the charge that he refused to hand over secret documents to the government, and he went further than that, refusing to hand them over. He actually engaged, it would appear from the evidence, in obstruction and trying to hide those documents or move them around, so that to frustrate the FBI's attempts to recover them and put them into a safe, secure place where they should be, and not on someone's bathroom floor. So, it's fascinating. This whole thing is fascinating to watch, but it's also very, very worrying, and particularly when you think about the consequences, the potential consequences that there are for the world's security, with Putin behaving the way he is. Imagine having a president like Trump who's in Putin's corner. I mean, it really is quite terrifying. Anyway, let's see what happens this week. It may be that the case will go to the jury by the end of the week. That seems quite likely. So we might have a decision maybe as soon as this week. Rather think that the jury is going to take a while. I think the judge is hoping that closing speeches will be done by midweek. So then it will be, the next step will be for it, I think after the jury instructions have been resolved, which could take at least half a day, I think. It could be the jury will be in a position to deliberate, as I say, before the end of the week, maybe even get a decision, who knows. So watching with fascination and a great deal of trepidation and concern. But for now, we will be back, by the way, to Christine and I, what I'm talking about now. We will be back soon on a much lighter subject. We want to tell our listeners all about our Nile trip, our vegan cruise along the River Nile in Egypt. We want to tell you all about that, and that'll be fun. But for now, it's, as I always say, please continue giving us the feedback. I'd love to hear other perspectives on this as my mind churns, as I try to come to terms with my own feelings about it. It's always great and helpful, as with my friend that I told you about the conversation I had yesterday. It's always helpful to have other opinions, and we welcome those. A very good way of doing it is via the podcast Refinement, Not Retirement's Facebook page. You can either feedback directly to us in a private way using a direct message, or you can comment on any of the videos there. But very much looking forward to getting back on here with Christine. It's always lovely being not just on my own with the microphone in front of me, but with my darling wife and life partner, Christine. And it'll be a great deal of fun telling you and sharing with you about our Nile cruise. Looking forward to that very much. But for now, it's goodbye just from me. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. Bye for now.